Chapter 5. The Netherlands, a kingdom created at a writing desk. Of all the European monarchies, the Dutch is among the most revealing, not because it is the oldest or the wealthiest, but because its artificial origin is peculiarly glaring. The Netherlands is a kingdom fabricated at the writing desk of the Congress of Vienna in 1815. It is a state that did not exist as a unified kingdom until the European powers resolved that it should exist. And the monarchy that governs this country is a monarchy by appointment, not by right. In this chapter, we shall apply the selfsame criteria as to Great Britain: blood, indigenat, dynastic continuity, the absence of morganatic marriages, and the lawfulness of the acquisition of power. And the verdict shall prove equally devastating. 5.1. Ex-nihilo. Out of nothing into royalty. We begin with the most fundamental fact. The Kingdom of the Netherlands, in the form in which it subsists today, was created in 1815 by the Congress of Vienna. This was a gathering of the victors over Napoleon, Austria, Prussia, Russia, Great Britain, who were redrawing the map of Europe at their pleasure. They determined which lands should pass to whom, which states should be called into being, and which dynasties should govern them. Before 1815, the territories that now compose the Netherlands had a complicated history. In the 16th to 18th centuries, they constituted the Republic of the United Provinces, a state without a monarch, in which power belonged to the merchants and to an aristocratic assembly, the States General. Formally, the Republic had no king. It had a stadtholder, a lieutenant, elected to his post, and this office was frequently occupied by the Princes of Orange. Yet they were no monarchs. They were elected functionaries. In 1795, the Republic was conquered by the French Revolutionary Army and transformed into the Batavian Republic, a puppet state of France. Thereafter, in 1806, Napoleon placed his own brother, Louis Bonaparte, upon the throne, who governed the Kingdom of Holland until 1810. And then Napoleon annexed the Netherlands outright, incorporating them into the French Empire. When Napoleon fell, the victors found themselves confronted with the question, what was to be done with these lands? They resolved to create a new kingdom, the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, which was to include the modern Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And they resolved to place upon the throne Willem of Orange, the son of the last stadtholder of the Republic of the United Provinces. This decision rested upon no dynastic right. No one examined Willem's blood. No one asked the people of the Netherlands whether they desired a king. No referenda were held. Simply, 5 great powers assembled at Vienna, weighed their interests, and resolved, here shall be a kingdom, and this man shall be its king. This is ex nihilo, out of nothing. A kingdom created by diplomats, not by history. From the standpoint of classical dynastic law, this alone renders the Dutch monarchy illegitimate. For a king cannot be appointed. A king can only be born a king, or, in the extreme case, prove his blood and seize the throne by force. But to receive a crown as a gift from foreign powers is no legitimacy. It is a protectorate. 5.2. The appointed king, Willem I as usurper. Willem I, the first king of the Netherlands, was proclaimed sovereign prince in 1813, after the liberation from the French occupation. Yet he became king only after the Congress of Vienna of 1815. He was appointed by the great powers. Who was this man? He was born at The Hague, in the Dutch Republic. His father, Willem V, was the last stadtholder. His mother, Wilhelmina of Prussia, was a Prussian princess. Formally, he was one of their own, born upon that soil. Yet mark this well, his dynasty, the House of Orange-Nassau, was of German origin. The first Willem of Orange, surnamed the Silent, was born in 1533 at Dillenburg, in Nassau, that is to say, in modern Germany. He was a German count who inherited lands in the Netherlands and placed himself at the head of the revolt against Spanish dominion. His descendants, Willem I among them, were Germans by blood. They spoke German. They wed German women. They laid their forefathers to rest in German crypts. From the standpoint of the principle of indigenat, of native origin, this alone suffices to declare the dynasty illegitimate. A king must not merely be born upon the territory. He must spring from a dynasty that has been bound to that soil for centuries. The House of Orange-Nassau was no such dynasty. They were German interlopers who obtained lands in the Netherlands as a result of the wars and marriages of the 16th century. Yet even if one shuts one's eyes to their German origin, the fact remains, Willem I became king, not by right of blood, but because the great powers found it convenient. He was a marionette, placed upon a throne to serve the interests of England, Prussia, Austria, and Russia. As one historian has written, Willem I governed as an absolute monarch, yet his authority was bestowed upon him by foreigners. This is no king. This is a governor of a foreign occupying administration, merely arrayed in a handsome crown. 5.3. German blood beneath the orange banner. The House of Orange is fond of presenting itself as the fathers of the fatherland. Willem I the Silent is a national hero, the champion of independence from Spain. His statues adorn every public square. His name is carved upon every monument. Yet no one speaks of the fact that Willem the Silent was a German, that he was born in Germany, that he spoke German, that he was a Count of Nassau, a German principality, that he came to the Netherlands as a foreigner who had the good fortune to inherit lands. And no one speaks of the fact that his descendants, the present House of Orange, remain Germans by blood. Yes, some of them were born in the Netherlands. Yes, they speak Dutch. Yet blood cannot be deceived. They are the descendants of German counts who seized power in an alien country and have held fast to it for 400 years. From the standpoint of classical dynastic law, this suffices to pronounce them illegitimate. Indigenat demands that a dynasty be native, not interloping. The House of Orange are interlopers. They are occupiers who have simply been sitting upon their territory for a very long while. 5.4. Counts, not kings, the plebeian origin of the House of Orange. We now approach the most delicate, yet also the most telling, point. The House of Orange is no royal line. It never was. Before the Congress of Vienna made them kings, they were counts. Counts of Nassau, German counts. What does this signify from the standpoint of dynastic law? The matter is simple. There exist differing ranks of the nobility. There are royal houses, Majestaten, those who govern kingdoms. There are princely houses, Fürstenhäuser, those who govern principalities. There are comital houses, Grafenhäuser, those who govern counties. And these ranks are not equal. A royal house stands above a princely house. A princely house stands above a comital house. A count cannot become a king simply because the fancy takes him. For that, one must either conquer a kingdom, as was done in antiquity, or receive a crown from an emperor, as was done in the Middle Ages. Parliament possesses no right to create a monarch. When a parliament invites a king, it commits an act of usurpation, arrogating to itself an authority that does not belong to it. And the monarch who receives his crown from the hands of a parliament becomes, not a sovereign, but the servant of that parliament, that is to say, in essence, a president in a crown, yet without an election. This is no legitimacy. It is a juridical fiction, cloaking a political usurpation. It is still less legitimate to receive a crown from the hands of foreign states, usurpers who possessed no right whatever to dispose of an alien country. The House of Orange did not conquer the Netherlands. They did not receive a crown from the Holy Roman Emperor. They received it from the Congress of Vienna, a convocation of foreign diplomats who resolved to make them kings. From the standpoint of dynastic law, this is usurpation. A count who styles himself a king, without possessing the right to do so, is an impostor. One may object, but the House of Orange were the stadtholders of the Republic of the United Provinces. They governed the country. Yes, they governed. As elected functionaries. As lieutenants. As hired managers. Yet not as monarchs. A stadtholder is no king. He is a functionary. His authority was delegated to him by the States General, the Parliament, and he could be dismissed. When Willem I became king in 1815, he did not restore an ancient monarchy. He created a new one. And he created it out of nothing, out of his comital title, out of his German blood, out of his station as an elected functionary. This is ex-nihilo in its purest form. The Dutch monarchy is no continuation of an immemorial tradition. It is an artificial construct fabricated by the diplomats of the 19th century from a German comital house that possessed absolutely no right to a royal title. And this fact, the comital origin of the House of Orange, is one more proof of their illegitimacy. For, in classical dynastic law, a crown cannot be bestowed upon a count. It can only be inherited. And the House of Orange did not inherit the crown. They received it as a gift from foreign powers. 5.5. Flight to Canada and abdication de facto. Cowardice beneath the crown. We turn now to the most disgraceful episode in the history of the Dutch monarchy, the events of May 1940. On the 10th of May, 1940, Nazi Germany invaded the Netherlands. German tanks crossed the frontier. The Luftwaffe bombed Rotterdam, laying waste to the city center and slaughtering hundreds of civilians. The Dutch army, ill-equipped and ill-prepared, strove to resist, yet there was no prospect of success. And what did the royal family do? It fled. On the 13th of May, 1940, Queen Wilhelmina went aboard the British destroyer HMS Hereward and quitted the port of Hook of Holland. Her daughter Juliana, together with her husband Bernhard and their children, Beatrix and Irene, were, at the selfsame hour, placed upon another vessel at Imoyden. The two parties of fugitives reunited in London, and a month later, when the Luftwaffe began to bomb the British capital, Juliana removed herself and her children to Canada. Wilhelmina remained in London. Thus began the 5-year government in exile. They abandoned their people. They left the Dutch nation under the Nazi occupation. In dynastic law, this act bears a perfectly precise, unambiguous juridical meaning, and no quantity of post-war propaganda can annul it. A monarch who abandons his people in the hour of mortal peril abdicates by the very fact of flight. The precedent upon which we rely is a British one, the selfsame precedent by which the European monarchical tradition itself determined the fate of fugitive kings once and for all. In December of 1688, King James II, Steward of England, fleeing before the advancing army of William III of Orange, the stadtholder of the Netherlands, 1650 to 1702, escaped from London and thereafter from the realm, casting the Great Seal into the Thames. The Convention Parliament, composed of Lords and Commons, resolved, King James II, having endeavored to subvert the constitution of the kingdom, having broken the fundamental laws, and having withdrawn himself out of the kingdom, has abdicated the government, and the throne is thereby vacant. Mark the sequence. Parliament did not wait for a formal document bearing a signature. It did not trouble itself with what James II might privately think of his own status. The bare fact of flight was held to be a sufficient ground for the juridical finding. A king who has quitted his kingdom has ceased to be king. This is no opinion, no interpretation, no revolutionary rhetoric. It is a precedent of English law, upon which, for centuries, the very monarchical legitimacy that the House of Orange now seeks to drape about itself has rested. In 1936, when Edward VIII abdicated, the parliamentary procedure once again confirmed that abdication cannot be a unilateral act, but requires the consent of both houses. Yet the flight of a monarch, his physical removal from the territory, is precisely what Parliament construes as an abdication. Wilhelmina did not obtain the consent of the States General for her departure. She signed no instrument of abdication, any more than James II had done. She simply stepped aboard a ship and vanished. Apply to her the selfsame standard that the British Crown applied to its own fugitive sovereigns, and you are left with a vacant throne. That the Dutch Parliament, after the war, pretended that nothing had occurred and greeted the returning fugitive with pomp speaks, not to the continuity of the dynasty, but to the political cowardice of deputies who feared to apply their own law to their own queen. Flight is abdication. The throne has stood vacant since May of 1940. All that has been raised upon that empty site is a juridical chimera. It should be noted, in passing, that the William III of Orange mentioned above is not the forefather of the House of Orange that sits in Holland today. William III died childless. The present House of Orange descends from Johann Wilhelm Friso and constitutes nothing more than a lateral and exceedingly remote line, possessing but a tenuous connection through the female line to William III. There have been other historical instances in which flight was synonymous with an acknowledged abdication. The most vivid, textbook case is that of Kaiser Wilhelm II. On the 9th of November, 1918, when revolution was already blazing through Berlin, he did not wait for a formal deposition. He simply got into a motor car, reached the Dutch frontier, and crossed it. His whole constitutional contrivance, his attempts to retain the crown of Prussia while renouncing the imperial dignity, all of it collapsed at the moment he physically left the country. The German government, without even waiting for his signature, proclaimed the Kaiser's abdication post factum because the bare fact of his flight had already made him a phantom king. That same autumn, Austria-Hungary collapsed as well. Emperor Karl I did not sign a formal abdication. He merely issued a manifesto in which he withdrew from the administration of the state. Yet on the 11th of November, 1918, he left Schönbrunn and retired to a private estate, and thereafter attempted outright to flee to Switzerland. This sufficed. The parliament proclaimed a republic, and the Habsburg throne, which had stood for 6 centuries, vanished in a single night. In 1931, King Alfonso XIII of Spain, confronted with the Republican election results, did not wait to be expelled by force. He simply left the country, publishing a valedictory manifesto from Marseilles. In Madrid, a republic was proclaimed on the instant, and the throne de facto ceased to exist at the very moment of his physical departure. And in 1940, in parallel with Wilhelmina's flight, King Carol II of Romania attempted the selfsame trick. He fled the country, formally abandoning the throne to his son. The result? The Antonescu dictatorship simply thrust the underage king aside, and after the war, the Romanian monarchy was abolished altogether. Whilst the royal family sipped tea in the safety of Ottawa, the Dutch were dying of starvation during the Hunger Winter of 1944 to 1945. Whilst the royal children played in Canadian parks, thousands of Dutch children were perishing of malnutrition. Whilst Queen Wilhelmina broadcast from London, her subjects hid from the Gestapo. From the standpoint of dynastic law, the flight of a monarch during a crisis is an automatic abdication. A monarch who quits his country in the hour of its peril renounces his duties. He cannot return in effect that nothing has happened. Yet we, across the gulf of 80 years, may put these questions. Why did the royal family flee, whilst thousands of Dutchmen remained and fought? Why did they not share the fate of their own people? Why did they not organize resistance from within? Why did they prefer safety to duty? The answer is simple. Because they have always prized their own skins above their country and felt not the slightest bond with that country, because they have used it solely as a source of private enrichment. And these are no kings. They are cowards in pasteboard crowns, who flee when a threat appears, and when it vanishes, return to enjoy all the perquisites bestowed by the throne upon which they, marionettes, were set by alien powers. Why, then, was the flight of a king equated with abdication in England, yet not in Holland? The matter is simple. In England, Parliament created the king. More precisely, the Convention Parliament of 1689 took an empty throne and said, "We, the representatives of the nation, shall determine who sits upon it, and upon what terms, and we care not a farthing what the fugitive James II may think upon the matter." The Parliament of England had, from of old, conceived of itself as the fountain of authority. It did not serve the monarchy, it engaged the monarchy. Hence the composure of 1688. The king has fled. The throne is vacant. Let us engage a new one. Let applicants for the post send their particulars to William of Orange, who has a Stuart wife and will suit admirably. This is no insurrection. It is the routine act of a sovereign body. In the Netherlands, the reverse is true. The monarchy created the parliament. The States General were, historically, an instrument of the stadtholders of the House of Orange, and thereafter of the kings of that selfsame house. The Constitution of 1815 was not written to restrain the monarch. It was written by the monarch to provide the elite with a handsome screen of representation without yielding any real power. The Parliament of the Netherlands has never been the fountain of authority. It has been an appendage to it. And so, in 1945, this Parliament is confronted with a situation. The Queen has fled. By every precedent, the throne is vacant. Yet the Dutch Parliament cannot declare the throne vacant, for that would signify an acknowledgement. We confer the crown. And the Parliament of the Netherlands is organically incapable of conceiving of itself as the fount of the crown. It was born, and from the first sifted, to serve the House of Orange. It is genetically unfit to depose them. And then something even more pitiable than servility occurs. A cognitive capitulation takes place. The Parliament, instead of taking the decision that law and precedent demanded, affects that no decision is required. It invents the word exile so as to avoid the word abdication. It greets Wilhelmina with flowers, and not with the juridical demand to know upon what ground she is returning at all to a throne she herself forsook. The Dutch Parliament is indeed composed of persons who have never been an independent organ of power. They are no sovereign parliament in the English sense. They are a college of registrars, whose function is reduced to the juridical certification of the will of the House of Orange. And this is no accident. It is a system. To Parliament are admitted, not those who will test the monarchy against the law, but those who are already prepared to accept that the law exists for every person save the House of Orange. These are no representatives of the people. They are notaries public in the service of usurpers. The most damning particular is this, that every one of these precedents was known to the Dutch government in 1945. Kaiser Wilhelm II, it should be noted, fled precisely to the Netherlands and lived there quietly, at his estate of Doorn, until his death in 1941. The Dutch jurists, therefore, did not merely know that the flight of a monarch equals the fall of a throne. They had seen this principle at work upon their own soil, in the person of their own neighbor, the Kaiser, the first 20 years of whose post-flight existence were passed precisely within their own jurisdiction. And when the selfsame history befell their own queen, they affected that no such precedent existed. That exile was not flight, but a temporary absence. That their own law was not obliged to follow the logic of history. 5.6. A juridical fiction, the extraterritorial chamber in Ottawa. Yet the most ludicrous, and the most disgraceful, episode was yet to come. In 1943, while in exile in Canada, Princess Juliana gave birth to a daughter. The child was named Margaret. And here a difficulty arose. According to the Dutch constitution, an heir to the throne must be born upon Dutch territory. Otherwise, he possesses no right to the throne. Margaret was born in Ottawa, in Canada. Formally, she possessed no right to inherit the crown. The Canadian government, wielding emergency powers under the War Measures Act, declared the hospital chamber extraterritorial for the duration of the delivery. This was no transfer of territory to the Netherlands. It was a temporary withdrawal of the chamber from the operation of Canadian law. The child was born, not in Canada, since Canadian law did not apply there, yet neither in the Netherlands, since the chamber had not become Dutch soil. She was born in a juridical nowhere, and it was precisely this nowhere that the Dutch Parliament, retrospectively, pronounced sufficient to preserve her rights to the throne. This is an unprecedented sleight of hand. In no country of the world, in no constitution, does any such concept as an extraterritorial hospital chamber exist. It was invented for the express purpose of concealing an inconvenient fact. The heiress to the throne was born abroad, because her family had fled the country. From the standpoint of dynastic law, this is a forgery. It is an attempt to legalize, after the fact, that which cannot be legalized. Margaret possessed no right to the throne. Yet Parliament and the royal family simply altered the rules of the game when it suited their advantage. How it was done? The Canadian government employed the War Measures Act, emergency legislation that conferred sweeping powers upon the government in time of war. On the authority of this statute, King George VI, as the monarch of Canada, issued a proclamation declaring the chamber extraterritorial for the duration of the birth. Here is what the Dutch prefer not to recall. This decision was not taken by the Canadian Parliament. The House of Commons of Canada did not vote upon the extraterritorial status. The Senate did not debate the question. The people of Canada, whose territory was being temporarily declared Dutch, gave no consent. All was resolved behind the closed doors of the cabinet and clothed in a royal proclamation founded upon emergency powers. And this is legitimacy in the Dutch fashion. Not democracy, not the rule of law, but emergency powers employed in circumvention of Parliament to create a juridical fiction. And thereafter, retroactively, they termed it a lawful birth. What is extraterritoriality in the terms of international law? It is no cession of territory. It is the temporary removal of a place from the operation of the laws of the host country, analogous to the immunity of embassies or military bases. Canada did not cede sovereignty to the Netherlands. It simply, for a time, withdrew that place from the operation of Canadian law. The birth of a child within an embassy of a foreign power does not render that child a national of that power. And the same logic applies here. The chamber in the Ottawa hospital did not become Dutch soil. It remained Canadian soil. The sole difference was that, for a few hours, Canadian laws did not run there. That is all. What occurred after the birth? After the delivery, the proclamation lapsed of its own accord. No statute of repeal was required. Had the chamber truly become Netherlands territory, its return to Canada would have demanded a fresh international treaty ratified by Parliament. Nothing of the sort took place. It was a temporary measure which expired of itself. Why this does not work, even upon their own logic? Here is the chain of events that the Dutch prefer not to analyze. 1. Fact. Margaret was born in Canada, in a Canadian hospital, upon Canadian soil. 2. Juridical fiction. Canada declared the chamber extraterritorial for the duration of the birth, in order to avoid the application of Canadian nationality law. 3. Yet, extraterritoriality is not a transfer of territory. It is a temporary withdrawal from the operation of the laws. 4. Consequence. The chamber did not become Dutch soil. It remained Canadian soil, merely under a special legal regime. 5. The lapse of extraterritoriality. After the birth, this special regime ceased. The chamber returned to the ordinary jurisdiction of Canada. 6. Juridical inference. If, at the moment of birth, the chamber was extraterritorial, and a minute later ceased to be so, it follows that this status was temporary and could not create a permanent juridical fact. Birth upon a temporarily extraterritorial territory is not equivalent to birth upon one's own territory. 7. Conclusion. Margaret was born in Canada. No juridical artifice can alter this fact. The fundamental question: if, at the moment of birth, the chamber was extraterritorial, and a minute later ceased to be so, what does this signify for the status of the child? The answer: nothing. Because the temporary juridical status of a place cannot create a permanent juridical fact. Birth upon a temporarily extraterritorial territory is not birth upon one's own soil. And do the Dutch today seriously assert that their princess was born upon Dutch territory? She was born in a Canadian hospital, in a Canadian chamber, beneath a Canadian sky. And no slip of paper with a stamp upon it can alter this fact. The Dutch may style this legitimacy as long as they please. But juridically it is a fiction, and its temporary character is the surest proof that no transfer of territory ever occurred. The constitutional somersault. Let us now dissect the constitutional somersault executed by the Dutch establishment in January of 1943, without so much as a patch of their own soil beneath their feet. Article 26 of the Constitution of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, as it then stood, was couched with a rigor that left no quarter for ambiguous construction. The Dutch constitution was clear that no person born on foreign soil could be in the royal succession. The heir to the throne, it ran, must be born upon the territory of the kingdom, not within the jurisdiction, not in a diplomatic mission, upon the territory, upon Dutch soil. Full stop. A law written for a nation that had spent centuries wresting every inch of dry land from the North Sea made no provision for sentimental indulgences touching exile. Either you are born upon that soil, or you are a legal nullity in the eyes of the law of succession. Princess Juliana, the sole heiress to the throne, was in Canada. In January of 1943, she gives birth to a daughter, Margaret, at the Ottawa Civic Hospital. The territory is the province of Ontario, a sovereign possession of King George VI. This birth, if one approaches the matter with the honesty of a jurist and not of a courtly sycophant, ought to have been a dynastic catastrophe. Princess Marianne of Orange-Nassau, the aunt of Queen Wilhelmina, had, a generation earlier, already forfeited her rights to the throne for herself and her posterity precisely because of a marriage to a foreigner contracted without parliamentary consent. Now the bare fact of birth outside the kingdom threatened to leave the House of Orange without a lawful heir. The letter of the law was pitiless. At this moment begins a juridical clown show that must arouse in any serious student of dynastic law, not laughter, but a cold fury. The Canadian government, entering into collusion with the Dutch court in exile, adopts an unprecedented act. The chamber in the Ottawa Civic Hospital where the labor took place is declared extraterritorial. Ponder that word. Not Dutch territory. For that, the Canadian Governor-General, the Earl of Athlone, possessed neither the authority nor the faintest juridical foundation. Canada cannot alienate its sovereignty by a stroke of the pen in favor of a foreign power, even an allied one, without amending its own legislation. No act of the Parliament of Canada transferred that hospital chamber to the jurisdiction of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. What then occurred? The chamber was declared no man's land, a juridical vacuum, a place to which the laws of Canada do not extend, yet which, at the same time, does not become the territory of the Netherlands. A pregnant princess lay down upon a cot, and around that cot there suddenly yawned a gray zone of international law, a hole torn in the fabric of state sovereignty. The child drew her first breath, not in Canada, because Canadian law had withdrawn from the chamber, yet neither in the Netherlands, because Dutch law had not stepped into it. She was born in nowhere. Behold the sophistry of true usurpers. The Constitution of the Netherlands demanded birth upon the territory of the kingdom. This is a positive requirement. A negative permission, to be born not upon foreign soil, is not its equivalent, never has been, and never could be, without an outright outrage upon juridical logic. If the Constitution demands that the heir be born upon Dutch soil, the trick of extraterritoriality resolves nothing. The child was not born upon Dutch soil. There is an end of the matter. The Dutch jurists who justified this farce insisted that Margaret was born, as they put it, within Dutch jurisdiction, or that the chamber was temporarily withdrawn from Canadian sovereignty. Yet let us ask the question, since when is the absence of a foreign jurisdiction equivalent to the presence of a national one? In that chamber, neither Canadian criminal law nor Dutch criminal law was in operation. Had the physician made a fatal error and slain both mother and child, by what law would he have been tried? Under what code would the death certificate have been drawn up? This is no territory. This is a legal cataclysm. And upon this cataclysm, the House of Orange-Nassau has erected its claim to legitimacy. 5.7. The London Farce. How the House of Orange abolished their own monarchy and pretended that nothing had occurred. A government without a monarchy. To grasp the scale of the juridical catastrophe that the House of Orange brought about in May of 1940, it suffices to attend closely to their own terminology, the very terminology they chose freely, without compulsion, in the quiet of their London chambers. They fled the country. The Queen, her heiress daughter, the ministers, all went aboard British vessels and vanished over the horizon. An abandoned people, an occupied territory, a collaborationist administration, all were left behind. And in London there arose a strange construction. It was termed, not the monarchy in exile, not the crown in exile, not even the Queen in exile. It was termed the government of the Netherlands in exile. Ponder that choice of words. If monarchy is a sacred, indissoluble union of crown and nation, why was it a government that found itself in London and not a monarchy? Why did Wilhelmina herself, broadcasting upon Radio Orange, declare, in a land of limited liberty, there is no place for the House of Orange? This is a monstrous self-exposure. She publicly, over the airwaves, acknowledged that the House of Orange and the country were two different things. That the House of Orange could exist somewhere else, when the country had no place for it. That the bond between crown and nation had been severed. Monarchy is no cat, to be transported to London and settled in Piccadilly. It is an institution which either subsists upon its own territory or subsists nowhere. A throne cannot be loaded aboard a destroyer. A crown cannot be packed into a trunk. Sovereignty does not travel with the physical body of a monarch. It abides in the soil, in the people, in the territory. When the Queen quitted that territory, she ceased to be queen. She became a private person with a lofty-sounding title, whom her British cousins sheltered in their house. Yet they did not merely flee. They instantly downgraded their own status. Not, the throne has removed to London, but the government has removed to London. The crown remained where it had always been, in the Netherlands. Only, the Netherlands were under enemy occupation, and no crown existed there in fact. That is to say, juridically, upon their own words, the monarchy ceased to exist in May of 1940 and was resumed only when they returned. Yet one cannot resume that which has ceased to exist without a fresh constitutive act. And there was none. There was merely a homecoming with flowers. They created a government. They administered the colonies, the fleet, the resources, and the Allies recognized this. Even the courts recognized it. Yet a government is not a monarchy. A republic, too, may have a government. That the Queen presided over a government in exile tells us only that she temporarily discharged the functions of a prime minister, and not that she had preserved her throne. She herself reclassified herself from a monarch into an executive functionary, and then, upon her return, affected that nothing had altered. The original architecture. To appreciate the depth of the collapse, let us recall the structure of the constitutional monarchy they professed to be defending. The Kingdom of the Netherlands, by its constitution, is a three-headed political body. The crown is the symbolic head of state, a part of the government, yet not the government itself. The government, in the narrow sense, is the cabinet of ministers, headed by a prime minister. The parliament, the States General, is the supreme representative organ, which controls the government and whose assent is required for all decisions of moment. The constitutional article in force in 1940 expressed the matter with perfect clarity. The king is inviolable. The ministers bear the responsibility. This signifies that the Queen, without her ministers, is not the government. She is a part of the ceremonial shop window, the face upon the postage stamps, the voice upon the radio. Authority belongs to the cabinet, which is answerable to Parliament. Such was the theory. Let us now observe what became of it in practice. What occurred in May 1940? The Queen fled. The ministers fled. Parliament had been dissolved for the duration of the war, its powers frozen by the occupation authorities. In London there found themselves, the Queen, a handful of ministers, and no one else. Now mark this well. these several persons proclaimed themselves the government of the Netherlands in exile. Yet who, precisely, issued this proclamation? For ministerial portfolios and the Queen. Not Parliament. Not the nation. Not any organ that at that moment possessed constitutional legitimacy. A knot of fugitives in a London drawing room proclaimed themselves the supreme authority of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and the world, swallowed up by war, did not pause to put any superfluous questions. What was Parliament after this proclamation? There was no Parliament. At all. Physically and juridically. The States General ceased to exist on the 21st of June, 1940, when their work was suspended by the Occupation Administration. The entire system of Crown plus Parliament, which, by the Constitution, was the sole fountain of legislative authority, had vanished. Parliament remained in abeyance until the autumn of 1945. And now the crucial question. If the government of the Netherlands is answerable to Parliament, and Parliament is absent, to whom was the government in exile answerable? The answer is devastatingly simple: to no one. It was a body possessing zero constitutional legitimacy within the Dutch legal order. The Allies recognized it. Yet the Allies recognized anything at all, so long as it bore a signboard useful for the coordination of the war effort. Their recognition was a political gesture, not a constitutional act. How the family could proclaim itself a government? Formally, the Queen did not proclaim herself the government. She appointed ministers from among those who had fled with her, and these ministers, not she, personally, constituted the government. Yet here is the piece of legerdemain that must make the nose of any constitutional jurist stream with blood. The Queen possessed no right to appoint ministers without a parliament. The Constitution required that the government enjoy the confidence of the States General. There were no States General. There was no confidence. There was not even a formal sitting at which the deputies might have expressed it. The Queen simply pointed her finger at whoever happened to be near at hand and said, "You are the government." Upon what ground? Upon the ground that there was no one left to tell her no. In other words, Wilhelmina and her entourage, finding themselves in London, arrogated to themselves the functions of Parliament. They played, simultaneously, the part of the Crown and the part of Parliament, because no one else was on hand to do so. This is no government in exile. It is 4 or 5 persons who collectively replaced the entire state. The Queen became Queen, Parliament, and Prime Minister in a single person, for no other reason than that there was no one at her side capable of stopping her. The Orange Werewolf. And here we arrive at the fundamental contradiction that demolishes the entire legend of the constitutional monarchy. If the Queen and her ministers could act without a parliament in London, it follows that Parliament is an optional ornament. If Parliament is an optional ornament, then the Netherlands is no constitutional monarchy, but an absolute one, only in exile. And if an absolute monarchy were possible in London, why should it suddenly be impossible in Amsterdam? Why, upon their return, did they instantly remember that Parliament was, after all, required? The device works in one direction only. When the House of Orange needs to act without restraint, Parliament vanishes like the morning mist. When it is necessary to legitimate the result, Parliament returns and obediently votes, retroactively. This is no constitutional monarchy. This is a constitutional werewolf, shifting its shape to suit the occasion. Who legitimated the return? And now, the most terrible question for the House of Orange. The one toward which we have been methodically driving this whole chapter. The one to which they have no answer. Who declared lawful the return of the royal family in 1945? Parliament. Yet Parliament did not exist at the moment when that return took place. The Queen and her ministers returned to liberated territory in May of 1945. Parliament first convened only in the autumn of that year. At the moment of Wilhelmina's physical return to the Netherlands, there was not a single constitutional organ capable of sanctioning that return. Who, then, met them and invested them with authority? The answer: no one. They simply returned. They rode into the country upon the tanks of the Allies and occupied their offices by right of "we were here before." The legitimacy of their return was secured, not by Dutch statutes, nor by the vote of any deputy. It was secured by the bayonets of the Allied armies and the administrative vacuum. Behold the naked truth, which for 70 years has been draped in marijuana fumes and tulips. The House of Orange returned to power, not because right stood upon their side. They returned because the Allies had liberated the country, and there were simply no other candidates for the throne at that moment. Right had nothing to do with the affair. Military force and political conjuncture did. Ratification after the fact. And here begins the most ludicrous and the most pitiful passage in the entire history. The Orange regime's own historians acknowledge what we are asserting. I quote the dry academic verdict. The Dutch government in London had to issue numerous decrees that were theoretically invalid, since they touched matters upon which the Constitution requires the assent of Crown and Parliament. Theoretically invalid. Do you grasp what this means? The entire London farce, 5 years of decrees, appointments, administrative decisions, propaganda, was theoretically invalid from the standpoint of their own constitution. This is no malediction from an opposition pamphlet. It is the finding of their own historiography. And what did they do afterward? In the autumn of 1945, when Parliament at last convened, they conducted a ratification. Parliament, retroactively, adopted an act that approved everything the Queen and her suite had perpetrated during the 5 years of her absence. The Act for the Approval of the London Decrees. By some such designation, this patch was sewn into the legal fabric of the kingdom. Yet ratification after the fact is no correction of an error. It is an acknowledgement of the error. If the Parliament of 1945 ratified the Acts of 1940 to 1945, it thereby officially confirmed those acts, without it, were devoid of force. And if they were devoid of force, then the Queen herself, for those 5 years, was no lawful queen. She was a private person who issued self-appointed commands. And the restoration of that private person to the throne was approved, not by any statute in force at the moment of her return, but by a statute enacted post factum. This is no longer mere extraterritoriality. It is juridical nihilism. A parliament that came into being after the Queen's return declared lawful the act of her return. The court first pronounced sentence, and only afterward heard the witnesses. The sequence is completely reversed. Cause and effect have changed places, because otherwise the structure could not be held upright. A juridical appraisal of this ratification and of the acts of the Dutch Parliament. As has been demonstrated above, in the years 1940 to 1945 no legitimate parliament existed, and the government in exile was illegitimate. In such a case, a lawful question arises. Who, then, convened the parliament in the autumn of 1945? Whence did it come at all? Who established the rules for its convocation? Who determined who possessed the right to vote and who might be elected? The answer that does not exist. The Parliament of the autumn of 1945 was convened by that selfsame government in exile, whose legitimacy we have refuted. Before the war, the Netherlands was governed by a constitution under which Parliament was elected for a fixed term. The last pre-war elections had been held in 1937. Formally, the mandate of that Parliament expired during the war. Yet since elections are impossible under conditions of occupation, the government in exile took a decision. After liberation, a provisional government would be swiftly formed, which would organize elections to a new parliament. And so it came to pass. In May of 1945, the Queen appointed a provisional government, the Cabinet of Schermerhorn, which organized parliamentary elections. These elections took place, and in the autumn of 1945, a new parliament assembled. Yet here is the difficulty. The provisional government was appointed by the Queen, by the selfsame Queen whose right to appoint anyone is absent, because she forfeited her throne in 1940 by flight. If the Queen is no queen, the provisional government she appointed is no government. And if the provisional government is no government, the elections it organized carry no juridical force. And if the elections carry no force, the parliament that assembled in the autumn of 1945 is no parliament. And if it is no parliament, its ratification of the London decrees is so much waste paper. What this signifies? The entire edifice rests upon a single, solitary assumption, that the Queen preserved her status despite her flight. Yet we have already proved that, by every historical precedent, James II, Wilhelm II, Carli of Austria, the flight of a monarch equals abdication. If this principle be applied consistently, the whole structure crumbles. The Queen is no queen. The provisional government is no government. The Parliament of 1945 is no parliament. The ratification is void. The entire post-war edifice is a juridical nullity. The verdict: the return of the royal family was legitimated, not by any lawful organ of authority, but by that family itself, with a subsequent ratification by a terrified parliament. This is no legitimation. This is the mutual cover-up of usurpers and their notaries. From 1940 to 1945, a Dutch government existed, but no Dutch monarchy existed. And in 1945, that government returned to liberated territory and effected that the monarchy had never vanished. Yet it had vanished. upon their own documents, upon their own radio broadcasts, upon that very word, government, which they chose in place of the word crown, because even they themselves, in the depths of their London drawing room, dimly sense that a throne cannot be carried away in a portmanteau. And now put the question to yourself. Who assembled the Parliament of the autumn of 1945, the selfsame Parliament that retroactively ratified all the London decrees and declared them lawful? It was convened by a provisional government appointed by Wilhelmina herself in May of 1945. The selfsame Wilhelmina whose status as queen we have already refuted. She appointed the government. The government organized the elections. The elections produced the Parliament. The Parliament ratified her own decrees and thereby confirmed her status. The serpent has bitten its own tail. The Creator receives legitimacy from its own creation, which could not itself have existed without the Creator. This is no law. It is a juridical perpetual motion machine, impossible in physics, yet somehow operative in the Dutch monarchy. And if this be so, the throne stood empty. And it remains empty to this day, no matter how many orange pennants flutter at the yearly parades. 5.8. The House of Orange continues its juggling of the laws, and the Hitler connection comes to light. In 1887, when King Willem III of the Netherlands, 1817 to 1890, not to be confused with William III, who was stadtholder of the Netherlands in 1650 to 1702, was left without any male heirs, they simply rewrote the rules. The Salic law was repealed. Cognatic primogeniture was introduced, a system under which a woman inherits if she has no brothers. And in 1983, they went still further and enacted absolute primogeniture. The eldest child inherits irrespective of sex. This is no evolution of the law. It is parliamentary usurpation in its purest form. When the dynasty became extinct in the male line, they did not acknowledge the obvious, that the House of Orange-Nassau had come to an end. They simply repealed the law that stood in their way. Imagine a football match in which the losing side, in the final minute, alters the rules and announces that goals scored with the left foot shall henceforth count double. Something very like that is the aspect worn by this legitimacy, as performed by the legal jugglers of the Dutch monarchy. What does this signify for Willem-Alexander, the present king of the Netherlands? The present king is the son of a woman who inherited the throne thanks to the retroactive abolition of the Salic law, and of a German without royal blood, whose candidacy was agreed upon by a parliamentary vote, as though he were an application for a bank loan. He is the product of two stretchings of the law. His grandmother, Juliana, was the daughter of Queen Wilhelmina and a German prince consort, a match that was itself, to put the matter gently, not unblemished from a dynastic standpoint. The House of Orange-Nassau became extinct in the direct male line in 1890, upon the death of Willem III. Everything that has followed since has been a patchwork of juridical contrivances, parliamentary sleights of hand, and German husbands naturalized to the Dutch crown by a show of hands. One such instance may be cited at once, the husband of Beatrix and the morganatic question. Let us turn to the husband of Beatrix, Claus von Amsberg. That name alone ought to have caused any Dutch parliamentarian to snap his codex shut and refuse consent to the match. Yet they did not refuse, and the clown show commenced. Origin: he was a German. Not merely a German. He was born upon an estate in Lower Saxony in 1926. He belonged to the Hitler Youth. In 1944, he was conscripted into the Wehrmacht and served in the 90th Light Infantry Division in Italy. The future prince consort of the Netherlands wore the uniform of the army that had occupied that very country scarcely 20 years before his wedding. Title: Von Amsberg is of the untitled German nobility. No prince, no duke, no member of a mediatized house. A simple von. The House of Amsberg did not stand even within hailing distance of the reigning dynasties of Europe. From the standpoint of classical dynastic law, the marriage of an heiress to the throne with such a person is a classic morganatic union. Parliamentary approval. Here they endeavored to strew a little straw beneath their feet. Parliament gave its consent to the marriage. Yet it is precisely this consent that betrays the difficulty. Wherefore was it required at all, if the union were a full and equal one? An act of parliamentary consent is no benediction, it is a crutch. It is an acknowledgement that, without parliamentary approval, the marriage would have been de facto morganatic, and the issue of it would have forfeited their rights to the throne, which, as it happens, is exactly what befell Beatrix's sister, Princess Irene, who married without parliamentary permission and was instantly struck from the line of succession. And the same fate overtook Prince Friso, the son of Beatrix herself, who was excluded from the queue for marrying without approval. And now let us turn to the participation of Parliament in this juggling, and to the light it casts upon the monarchy. Reflect upon this. A monarch is a sovereign. A sovereign asks no one's leave to marry. The very idea of monarchy is erected upon the principle that the crown belongs to the dynasty by divine or hereditary right, and not by the decision of sundry powers, who appointed the Orange monarch in 1815, nor by the decision of a committee styled a parliament. If a committee of 150 deputies may, by a single vote, strike an heir from the line of succession, then the crown does not belong to the dynasty. It belongs to the committee. The dynasty is nothing more than a leaseholder of the crown, to whom Parliament may at any moment refuse to renew the lease. From the acts of Parliament, it follows that the Dutch monarch is not even a servant. He is a marionette, to whom the States General have issued the crown for use upon conditions set down in the Constitution, in which they may at any moment revoke by a simple majority. This is no monarchy. It is an elective office, with a life tenure and a hereditary principle for the selection of candidates, upon the condition that Parliament approves every link in that hereditary chain. Compare this with the office of a president. A president is elected, yet a president is not obliged to ask Parliament's leave to marry. His children do not forfeit the right to stand for the presidency if he marries without the consent of Congress. A president, whatever the restraints upon his authority, preserves his personal autonomy in the affairs of his family. A Dutch monarch does not. His private life is regulated by a parliamentary vote. He is no more at liberty in his choice of a spouse than a serf whose landlord must approve his bride. And here we arrive at a devastating conclusion. If Parliament may strip an heir of his rights to the throne, it follows that Parliament is the fountain of those rights. And if Parliament is the fountain of the rights to the throne, it follows that no monarchy has existed in the Netherlands from the moment the first constitution that enshrined this power was adopted. There subsists an office, transmissible by inheritance, yet confirmed by a vote. This is no monarchy. It is a parliamentary republic with a hereditary master of ceremonies. Princess Irene and Prince Friso are no exceptions to the rule. They are the proof of it. They are a demonstration of the very mechanism that the Dutch bashfully conceal behind the screen of constitutional monarchy. When an heir does something that Parliament dislikes, Parliament casts him out of the queue. It is not the monarch who reigns. Parliament reigns. The monarch is merely an ornament upon the facade, to be replaced at any moment. The juggling of the laws. The precedents demonstrate that the Dutch monarchy does not blush to alter the laws at its own convenience, in order to keep its usurper's seat upon the throne. In 2013, Queen Beatrix abdicated in favor of her son, Willem-Alexander. The abdication was clothed in a parliamentary act and staged with a pomp worthy of a medieval ritual. Yet, from the standpoint of dynastic law, abdication is a juridical absurdity. A king cannot retire. The throne is not transmitted by testament. A monarch reigns for life, or he does not reign at all. Abdication is an acknowledgement that the monarch's authority proceeds, not from God and not from blood, but from a parliament which may accept his resignation. Beatrix became the third consecutive queen of the Netherlands to abdicate the throne. Wilhelmina abdicated in 1948, Juliana in 1980, Beatrix in 2013. This has transformed the Dutch monarchy into a post with a right of pensionable retirement. Yet this is no monarchy. It is a republic in which the president is styled a king, and the office is handed down by inheritance, yet the holder may resign at any moment. If a monarch may abdicate, why may not the people dismiss him? The logic of abdication leads directly to a republic. In the case of Beatrix, there is a further dimension. She abdicated shortly after the scandal touching her husband, Prince Claus, who died in 2002, and after her son Willem-Alexander and his wife Maxima had been embroiled in the scandal of Maxima's father, Jorge Zorriguita, who had been the Minister of Agriculture of Argentina during the military junta and was accused of complicity in the Dirty War. The disappearances and murders of opponents of the regime. The abdication permitted Beatrix to evade accountability for these scandals and to pass the hot potato to her son. This is one more argument. Monarchs abdicate, not because they are weary, but because they desire to escape responsibility. 5.9. Parliamentary usurpation, constitutional reforms, and the alteration of the rules of succession. If you suppose the fiction of the extraterritorial chamber to have been the sole instance of a creative approach to the law, you are mistaken. In 1983, a package of fundamental amendments was introduced into the Constitution of the Netherlands. Among other innovations, the principle of absolute primogeniture replaced the old rule of male preference. Henceforth, the eldest child inherits the throne irrespective of sex. Parliament arrogated to itself the right to rewrite dynastic law by a simple vote, a right that no classical monarchical regime ever conceded to a representative organ. From the standpoint of modern political correctness, this is progress. From the standpoint of dynastic law, it is usurpation. For Parliament possesses no right to alter the rules of succession. These rules are no statutes enacted by men. They are a sacred inheritance, grounded in blood, tradition, and divine right. Parliament cannot repeal the Salic law. Parliament cannot decree that, henceforward, women shall inherit on a par with men. This is the prerogative of God and of history, and not of a knot of politicians at The Hague. When the Dutch Parliament amended the Constitution in 1983, it committed an act of usurpation. It arrogated unto itself a right that does not belong to it. And the monarch who signed that constitution acknowledged that his authority proceeds from Parliament and not from God. This is one more proof that the Dutch monarchy is no monarchy in the classical sense. It is a republic in a crown, in which Parliament is the true sovereign and the king is its hired functionary. 5.10. The morganatic marriage. Maxima, daughter of an Argentine minister. Before Maxima, the heir to the throne had had another love. Her name was Emily, yet she was not good enough for the House of Orange. She was identified and removed. And only when the daughter of a minister of a murderous junta, the executioner of 30,000 souls, appeared upon the stage did the palace gates swing open. Such is love in the royal household. In 2001, the heir to the Dutch throne, Willem-Alexander, married Maxima Zorreguieta. She was the daughter of Jorge Zorreguieta, who had occupied the post of Minister of Agriculture of Argentina. No royal blood, no aristocrat, simply the daughter of a functionary. From the standpoint of classical dynastic law, this union is morganatic, and the issue of a morganatic union possessed no right to inherit the throne. Yet the Dutch Parliament, as in the case of the extraterritorial chamber, simply approved the marriage. It enacted a statute permitting Willem-Alexander to wed Maxima, and it declared that their children would possess the right to the throne. Parliament once again arrogated to itself the right to abrogate centuries-old dynastic statutes. Today, Willem-Alexander and Maxima have 3 daughters: Katharina Amalia, the heiress, Alexia, and Ariane. They stand in the line of succession. Yet, from the standpoint of classical law, they possess no right whatever to this. Their mother is not of royal blood. Their father contracted a morganatic marriage. They are bastards in the sense of the law of succession. Of course, Parliament has legalized everything. Yet Parliament possesses no right to abrogate dynastic statutes. Its approval is the selfsame forgery as the extraterritorial chamber at Ottawa. 5.11. The traffic in titles and orders, the monarchy as a corporation. The Dutch royal house has repeatedly been accused of selling orders and titles in exchange for donations to the royal funds. In some countries, this is called corruption, and it is the prostitution of the symbols of state authority. Orders and titles ought to be a reward for services to the fatherland, not a commodity to be purchased for coin. Yet in the Netherlands, as in other monarchies, this has become common practice. Wealthy businessmen donate millions to the royal funds, and in return, they receive a knighthood or a place in the queue for an audience with the king. This is no monarchy. This is a millionaire's club in which memberships are sold. Yet the traffic in titles and orders is but the tip of the iceberg. The true filth lies deeper. The Dutch royal family holds a monopoly upon kinds of business that, in any other country, would either be strictly regulated by the state or wholly prohibited. Let us begin with the casinos. In the Netherlands, there subsists a state monopoly upon games of chance. The sole company that possesses the right to organize casinos is Holland Casino. And who controls this company? The state. And who controls the state? The Crown. Formally, Holland Casino is the property of the Dutch state, and the profit flows into the budget. Yet the control of this monopoly, including the appointment of the management, the issuance of licenses, the fixing of the rules, is exercised in the name of the Crown. This signifies that the royal family, through its ministers and its appointees, controls the entire gaming market of the country. Were such a monopoly held by a private company or by a mafia clan, it would be termed a criminal organization. Yet when the crown does this, it is styled state regulation. Let us go further. Narcotics. The Netherlands is known for its liberal policy in respect of soft drugs. Yet few know that the state possesses a monopoly upon the production of opiates for medical ends. The company BACM, Bedrijfsorganisatie voor de Medicinale Cannabis, is the sole lawful producer of medicinal marijuana in the Netherlands. And this company is controlled by the state. And the state, by the crown. The royal family, through its state structures, controls the production and distribution of narcotic substances. Only for medical ends, to be sure. Yet the bare fact that the monarchy is directly implicated in the production of narcotics is a scandal that, for some reason, no one ever discusses. Yet the most important thing of all is the monopoly upon violence. In any state, the army, the constabulary, and the secret services swear their oaths to the monarch. In the Netherlands, soldiers take an oath of fealty to the king. The constabulary act in the name of the crown. The prisons are under the control of ministers appointed by the crown. This signifies that the royal family possesses the lawful right to employ force. It may arrest, imprison, and, in extreme cases, kill, through the constabulary and the soldiery, in the name of the state. And this right is transmitted by inheritance. What distinguishes a mafia from a state? A mafia, too, holds a monopoly upon violence within its territory. A mafia, too, controls illegal, and sometimes legal, forms of business. A mafia, too, exacts tribute, taxes, from those who dwell within its territory. The sole difference is that the mafia is not sanctioned by statute, and the monarchy is, by a parliament which it itself controls. In the case of the Dutch royal family, the mafia analogy becomes still more glaring. The House of Orange holds an exclusive right to the casinos. They hold control over the production of narcotics. They hold a monopoly upon violence. And they transmit these rights by inheritance. Were the family of Jan van Hoven, a notorious Dutch drug baron, to hold such privileges, they would be called a criminal syndicate. Yet since it is the family of Orange, they are styled a royal dynasty. Of course, the defenders of monarchy will cry. But this is the state. It is not the king's private business. Ah, is it not? Why, then, does the king personally appoint ministers? Why does he possess the right of veto upon statutes? Why does he receive millions from the budget for his private expenditure? Why do his children inherit these privileges? Because the crown is no organ of the state. The crown is a family business that has privatized the functions of the state. And this family business bears every hallmark of a mafia structure, a monopoly upon violence, control over the most lucrative branches of commerce, the hereditary transmission of power, and total impunity. And here is a thing that is peculiarly telling. When, in 2003, Prince Friso, second in the line of succession, prepared to marry Mabel Wis-Smit, it emerged that his betrothed had enjoyed exceedingly close relations with Klaas Bruinsma, the criminal king of Amsterdam, a drug baron who controlled an immense share of the cocaine market of Europe before he was shot dead in 1991. Mabel had concealed these ties from the Queen and from Parliament. When the truth came to light, Friso was obliged to renounce his rights to the throne. Yet he married her even so. And today, Mabel bears the title of princess. What do you make of such company for a royal family? The friend of a drug baron, a woman who had raised funds for the legalization of narcotics from George Soros, and who had worked with a man who styled himself the fifth column inside the United Nations. And this is no distant kinswoman. This is the wife of the brother of the king. Now, as touching prostitution. In the Netherlands, prostitution is lawful. Brothels receive licenses from the local authorities. The state regulates this industry, gathers taxes, and ensures safety. And who controls the state? The crown. Ministers are appointed by the king. The constabulary swears its oath to the king. Statutes are signed by the crown. This signifies that the royal household, through its state structures, is the regulator and the beneficiary of the sex industry. Every euro earned in the lawful brothels is taxed, and the tax flows into the budget controlled by the crown. Every license is issued in the name of the state, whose head is the king. Of course, the defenders of monarchy will cry. But the king does not personally manage the brothels. Ah, does he not? Why, then, does he personally appoint the ministers who determine the policy in this sphere? Why does the constabulary, which keeps order in the red light districts, swear fealty to him? Why do the taxes upon prostitution go into a budget that he controls? The royal family does not simply take protection money from prostitution. It is the supreme regulator of it. And this is yet another facet of their business. And the crowning stroke of irony is this. Today, the heiress to the Dutch throne, Princess Catharina Amalia, is compelled to dwell under heightened security. The Moroccan drug mafia threatens to abduct her. She cannot leave her house. She has abandoned her studies at Amsterdam. Her life is a gilded cage. And who created this situation? The selfsame persons who have transformed the Netherlands into a narco-state 2.0, as a Dutch police officer once put it. To be sure, the royal family does not grow coca plants in its palaces. Yet for decades, they have looked through their fingers as their country has been turned into the European center of the drug trade. They have drawn taxes from that trade, through the lawful coffee shops and the banks that launder the money. They have appointed ministers who have done nothing. And now, their own daughter cannot set foot in the street. Karma, gentlemen. Karma. The traffic in titles and orders is no more than the cherry atop the cake. When the royal family sells knighthoods in exchange for donations to its own funds, it is no different from a mafioso who sells protection for a share in a business. The sole difference is that the mafioso at least does not pretend to be a philanthropist. Let us pose the question, wherein, in truth, lies the difference between the Dutch royal family and a classic mafia structure? The mafia traffics in offices and privileges. The royal household sells titles and orders. The mafia takes protection money from gambling. The crown holds a monopoly upon the casinos. The mafia controls the narcotics trade. The state, subordinated to the crown, holds a monopoly upon the production of medicinal opiates, and Prince Friso married a woman who was intimate with the largest drug baron of Amsterdam. The mafia regulates prostitution upon its territory. The crown, through its ministers and its constabulary, regulates the red light districts. The mafia maintains a corporation of murder for the elimination of the inconvenient. The crown has the army, the constabulary, and the secret services, who swear fealty to it and stand ready to employ violence in its name. The sole difference is that the mafia operates outside the law, while the royal family operates within the law, a law that it has itself created. The mafioso risks prison. A king, never. The mafia pays no taxes upon its income. The royal family exacts taxes from others. The mafia lurks in the shadows. The crown blazes upon the coinage and the coats of arms. Yet the essence is one and the same. A monopoly upon violence, control over the most lucrative branches of commerce, the hereditary transmission of power, and total impunity. If this is not a mafia, what, then, is a mafia? It is noteworthy that the traces of corruption and bribe-taking lead straight to the monarch's throne, and what follows is only that which has become public knowledge. In 2004, when Prince Bernhard was laid in the grave, the Dutch newspaper De Volkskrant published an interview that he had given upon terms of the strictest embargo. Nothing was to be published while he yet lived. And what did he say, knowing that he was beyond punishment? He confessed that he had lied for decades. Yes, he had taken a bribe from Lockheed, $1.2 million. He confessed that he had an illegitimate daughter by an American woman. He confessed to countless infidelities. And he himself said that the word Lockheed would, in all likelihood, be engraved upon his tombstone. This is no slander. These are his own words. A man who was the face of the Dutch monarchy, who wore the uniform of a general, who represented the country upon the world stage, was, in his lifetime, a liar and a corrupter. And after death, he confessed it to ease his soul. And this man is the grandfather of the present king. And his daughter, Beatrix, governed the Netherlands for 33 years. And his grandson, Willem-Alexander, governs to this day. The Dutch may style this legitimacy. Yet legitimacy erected upon falsehood and bribe-taking is no legitimacy. It is a farce. 5.12 Juridical conclusion, a monarchy upon the sand. Now, having examined every particular, let us draw the threads together. Criterion status elucidation. Ex-nihilo grossly violated. The kingdom was created by the Congress of Vienna in 1815. Before this, a republic without a monarch. Appointment by external forces grossly violated. Willem I became king by the decision of the great powers, and not by right of blood. Comital origin grossly violated. The House of Orange is a comital house, Nassau, not a royal one. A count cannot become a king by right. Indigenat, native origin, grossly violated. The dynasty is of German origin. The first Willem was born in Germany. Dynastic continuity systematically and grossly violated. 1. The flight of Wilhelmina, 1940, equals automatic abdication by the precedent of James II, 1688, Kaiser Wilhelm II, 1918, and others. A monarch who abandons his people forfeits his throne. The Dutch parliament refused to apply this principle to its own queen. 2. The tradition of abdications. Wilhelmina in 1948, Juliana in 1980, Beatrix in 2013, has transformed the monarchy into a post with a right of pensionable retirement, which contradicts the principle of lifelong service. Juridical fiction, extraterritorial chamber. Grossly violated. Canada declared a hospital chamber extraterritorial for the duration of a birth, employing emergency legislation, the War Measures Act, in circumvention of Parliament. This was no cession of territory, it was a temporary withdrawal from the operation of the laws. After the birth, the fiction lapsed. Birth upon a temporarily extraterritorial territory is not equivalent to birth upon one's own soil. The Netherlands subsequently adopted a special statute, retroactively declaring this legitimate, which is a direct admission that, without such a statute, the child would not have been legitimate. The method betrays the systematic approach of the dynasty. When the law is inconvenient, they do not alter it. They create a juridical chimera and cloak it, after the fact, with a parliamentary vote. Absence of morganatic marriages grossly violated the marriage of Beatrix to Claus von Amsberg, a Nazi of the Hitler Youth, the marriage of Willem Alexander to Maxima Zurigita, the daughter of a minister, not of royal blood. Parliamentary usurpation systematically and grossly violated. 1. The refusal to declare the throne vacant after the flight of Wilhelmina, 1940. 2. The retroactive ratification of the theoretically invalid decrees of the government in exile, 1945. 3. The parliamentary approval of a morganatic marriage. 4. The constitutional reform of 1983, which transformed the crown into an appointed office. What do we behold? Not a single criterion of classical legitimacy has been met. The Dutch monarchy is an artificial construct created by diplomats, sustained by parliamentary acts and juridical fictions, and governed by a dynasty of German origin which cravenly fled the country in the hour of peril. Willem Alexander and his daughters are no king and no heiresses by right. They are the products of a political decision taken at Vienna in 1815, and of parliamentary machinations that retroactively legalized that which could never have been lawful. 5.13. Breda, Den Bosch, and Maastricht, the cities that never loved the House of Orange. The official history of the Netherlands teaches that the House of Orange are the fathers of the fatherland, who united the country in the struggle against Spanish dominion. That the whole land, from Groningen to Maastricht, fought beneath the Orange banner. That the cities of Breda and Den Bosch are the loyal bastions of the dynasty. All of this is false. Let us begin with Breda. Yes, Willem I the Silent made that city his seat. Yes, the sepulchre of the House of Orange is to be found there. Yet Breda was no willing capital. It was conquered territory. The city belonged to the House of Nassau, but its inhabitants, Catholics, never shared the Protestant fervor of the House of Orange. During the 80 Years' War, Breda changed hands several times. The Spaniards took it. The Dutch retook it. The people of the city, the majority of whom remained loyal to the Catholic faith, looked upon both sides with an equal suspicion. In Den Bosch, here the situation is even more revealing. During the 80 Years' War, Den Bosch remained loyal to the Spaniards. The city resisted the House of Orange until 1629, when, after a long siege, it was taken by the Dutch army. This was no campaign of liberation. It was a conquest, and the people of Den Bosch have never forgotten it. For centuries, they have regarded the House of Orange as occupiers, and not as liberators. Today, Breda and Den Bosch are cities of the province of North Brabant. It is the Catholic South, which has always stood apart from the Protestant North. They speak with a different accent here. They eat different food. They celebrate different feast days. And they have never fully accepted the House of Orange. The Flemish nationalists in Belgium demand independence. The Scots demand a referendum. The Catalans demand secession from Spain. And in the Netherlands, silence. Yet this is not because there is no discontent. It is because the discontent has been suppressed, forgotten, hushed up. Yet let us put the question, why should the inhabitants of North Brabant pay taxes for the upkeep of a royal family that has historically been the symbol of the Protestant North, which subjugated their forefathers? Why should they swear fealty to a German king whose ancestors conquered their cities by force? Why should their region, which has never been wealthy, sponsor the palaces, the yachts, and the holy socks of the House of Orange? Of course, official historians will intone that this was the unification of the country. Yet unification by force is no unification. It is occupation. And the occupation continues to this day, not by the Spaniards now, but by the House of Orange. If the Flemings may demand independence, why may the people of North Brabant not demand autonomy? If the Scots may hold referenda, why may the Brabanters not vote upon secession? The answer is simple, because the entire Dutch identity would then collapse, and with it, the legitimacy of the House of Orange. For if Brabant were to depart, who would be next? Limburg? Zeeland? Amsterdam? The royal family is well aware of this vulnerability, and so they do everything in their power to ensure that the subject is never broached. They call Breda the cradle of the dynasty. They conduct ceremonies at Den Bosch. They scatter subsidies among the Brabantine museums and churches. They endeavor to purchase loyalty. Yet respect cannot be purchased. Silence may be purchased. Inaction may be purchased. Yet love cannot be purchased. And, sooner or later, the inhabitants of Breda and Den Bosch will recall that their forefathers did not desire the House of Orange. And they will ask, why should we desire them now? 5.14. The Forgotten Usurpation. Why the Dutch do not know their own history. Ask a Dutchman about his monarchy. What will you hear? Well, there was Napoleon, and then he was driven out, and then they assembled and appointed Willem. That is all. The end of the tale. No question as to why, in the first place, some German count became a king. No question as to why a nonentity, raised from the dirt, ex-nihilo, could be appointed a king, as though there had never existed any laws of blood, any Salic principle, any prohibition upon the appointment of kings by a parliamentary vote, as though a throne were simply a chair, in which one may seat any piece of nothing at all, if such was the resolution taken at Vienna. And if you are playing at a pasteboard hybrid of monarchy and democracy, in which the throne is filled from the gutter by show of hands, wherefore, then, do you need a monarchy at all? No question as to why foreign powers possess the right to dispose of an alien country. No indignation at the fact that the royal family fled to England in 1940, abandoning its people to the Nazi occupation. Ask about the birth of Princess Margaret at Ottawa and the juridical fiction of the extraterritorial chamber. The Dutchman will shrug his shoulders. Well, that's what was decided. It's all lawful. He does not see the forgery. He does not grasp that the extraterritorial chamber is an unprecedented juridical trick, the like of which exists nowhere else in the world. He was told it's allowed, and he believed it. Ask about the morganatic marriages, and in reply you may even hear something about a bond with the common people, and so forth. And as proof of this bond, they may even show you a photograph of the king in holy socks, or riding a tram, or upon a bicycle. Can the Dutch truly be so obtuse? They put no questions, because they have been taught not to put questions. Their system of education is not a training in analysis. It is a dressage. The schools give the Dutch precisely as much knowledge as is required to keep them from doubting. They teach them the mantras, the House of Orange, fathers of the fatherland, the monarchy, stability. It's how things turned out. Cram. Memorize. Do not think. It is no accident that one may hear a Dutchman ask whether your diploma has expired. If you finished your university 10 years ago, an absence of knowledge, a wretched educational system, and an absence of the capacity for analysis and logical thought. That is the explanation. They simply do not understand the difference between right and fiction. They do not understand the difference between knowledge and a commodity. For them, a diploma is no certificate of the mastery of a profession and the development of thought. It is a product with a limited sell-by date, like a pot of yogurt, like a subscription to a gymnasium. They think that law, history, logic, these are like software. There was version 1.0, and now there is version 2.0, and your version is obsolete and no longer supported. Hence their attitude to the monarchy. Well, there used to be some dynastic laws or other, and now we've updated them. Now the king is normal. We have a democracy. They do not grasp that law is not updated like a telephone, that the fundamental principles of legitimacy have no statute of limitations, that one cannot update the Salic law, abolish indigenat, legitimate a flight retroactively, and pretend that the thing functions. Yet, for a person who believes that a diploma goes sour, for him, everything has gone sour. Law has gone sour. History has gone sour. Truth has gone sour. Nothing remains save what he is told today. This is no longer merely a wretched educational system. It is a system of programmed imbecility, and it serves the House of Orange to perfection. A person who believes that knowledge has an expiry date will never ask why the king is seated upon the throne. He will simply update his firmware and carry on. And whatever it is not necessary to know is omitted. No one in a Dutch school will tell you that the House of Orange were merely alien German counts, nihil, dirt, who unlawfully received a crown as a gift from foreign diplomats, and that this is illegal. No one will explain why the flight to Canada does not count as an abdication, and why the return of the fugitive royal family was accepted unlawfully, and what was the legal status of those who accepted them. No one will ask whether it is lawful to declare a hospital chamber a territory where the laws of Canada do not run for a single day, and that a territory where Canadian law does not run is nonetheless not Dutch territory. These are no inconvenient questions. What do the jurists make of all this? These are the questions that bring the whole edifice crashing down, and so they are never put, and those who do put them are cast out as pariahs. Conformism is no accident. It is the very foundation of Dutch society. The Dutch plume themselves upon their tolerance and upon a pasteboard liberty. Yet just try to put a question touching the legitimacy of the monarchy. Try to say that the House of Orange are usurpers. Try to demand a referendum. You will become an outcast. You will be laughed at. You will be called a conspiracy theorist. Why? Because they are slaves, and they love their chains. They are given just enough to keep them from rebellion. Benefits, subsidies, jobs that allow them not to die of hunger, cheap mortgages. And they will defend the status quo because they fear to lose these crumbs. The rich are given titles and access to the throne, and they will defend the monarchy because they have invested their money in it, and the crown has given them pasteboard titles or state contracts. Conformism is a strategy for survival amidst a total hypocrisy and falsehood. The fear of losing what one has is always stronger than the desire to obtain what one lacks. The system knows this, and it exploits this fear. It arranges things so that it is unprofitable for you to think. To ask questions is to take a risk. To criticize the monarchy is to become an outcast. To demand the truth is to lose your employment. And the majority choose silence. Because silence is safe. Because silence is profitable. Because silence is what they have been taught. The Dutch are no victims of deception. They are its accomplices. They know that their monarchy is a fiction. They know that the House of Orange were German counts. They know that the flight to Canada is a disgrace. Yet they affect to know nothing. Because to acknowledge the truth would be to acknowledge that they have been deceived all their lives. And that is too painful and too terrifying. And so the Dutch defend their monarchy, not because they believe in it, but because they believe in their own falsehood. And this falsehood is the only thing that yet holds their society back from the collapse that is inevitably coming. The irony of fate. The Dutch, who once overthrew the Spanish king and created a republic, are today upon their knees before German counts who cannot even speak their tongue without an accent. They have traded liberty for security, a republic for a fiction, dignity for welfare checks. 5.15 What remains? A void. The Dutch monarchy rests upon three pillars: habit, propaganda, and the absence of any alternative. The Dutch have grown accustomed to the House of Orange. They see them upon the television on every national holiday. They rejoice when the king smiles, and are saddened when the queen is sorrowful. Yet put the question to a Dutchman, by what right does the House of Orange govern? And he will be unable to answer. For there is no answer. There is only the story. That is how things turned out. And how things turned out is no juridical argument. What is most ludicrous in all this, meanwhile, is the attitude of the House of Orange themselves toward the Dutch people, a people that never chose them, and who, from the standpoint of the law, are the subjects of an unlawful monarchy and of usurpers. In 2003, the Dutch royal family underwent what the press termed a bomb, a public exposé from the Queen's own niece, Princess Margarita de Bourbon de Parme. A scandal of the first magnitude erupted, laying bare the essence of this model family. One of the princes, standing in the royal carriage at an official ceremony, saluted the crowd with one hand, whilst with the other, concealed from the view of the throng, yet not from the television cameras, he simulated the act of copulation. This was no awkward gesture. It was a public mocking of their own people. Yet the royal family, as ever, affected that nothing had occurred. They simply trusted that no one would notice, or that everyone would forget. Yet the internet forgets nothing. It is a curious thing, when the Queen's niece told the truth, about Beatrix's drinking, about the intrigues within the palace, and about the prince's onanism directed at the populace, she was struck out of the family. Her children were stripped of their titles. This is no family. This is a mafia which annihilates those who violate the law of omerta. Within the Dutch royal household, there truly exists a deeply stratified system for the cleansing of information, and that which seeps to the surface is but the tip of the iceberg. What we see in Britain, the hysterics of Meghan Markle, the scandals with Andrew, is a managed chaos, a distraction. In the Netherlands, by contrast, a system of total control is at work, in which compromising material is either destroyed at the root or its bearers are neutralized. What follows are but some, and by no means the only, instances worthy of note. The affair of Johan Friso, the accident of a prince who knew too much. Prince Johan Friso, the second son of Queen Beatrix, was accounted the most intelligent and independent member of the family. He renounced his rights to the throne in 2004 in order to marry Mabel Wis-Smit, a woman who, in her youth, had been intimate with the notorious Dutch drug baron Klaas Bruinsma. The match provoked a colossal scandal, and Johan Friso was, in effect, cast out of the royal house. On the 17th of February, 2012, the prince was caught beneath an avalanche in the Austrian resort of Lech. He was dug out after 20 minutes, yet owing to a prolonged cardiac arrest, he sustained severe hypoxic brain injury. He fell into a coma from which he never emerged and died in 2013. What lies concealed behind the accident? Johan Friso was no mere banished prince. He worked for an investment bank and had access to information touching the financial flows of the royal family, including offshore accounts and schemes for the evasion of taxes. After his accident, all his private archives, his notebooks, and his documents were immediately seized by the security service of the royal household. His widow, Mabel, was wholly excluded from any access to the information. The official account of the avalanche was never confirmed by any independent inquiry. The Austrian authorities speedily closed the case. Margarita de Bourbon-Parme, the illegitimate daughter who was erased. Princess Irene, the sister of Queen Beatrix, provoked a national crisis in 1964 by converting to Catholicism and marrying the Carlist claimant to the Spanish throne, Carlos Hugo de Bourbon-Parme. Their marriage dissolved in 1981, and after the divorce, a long judicial war commenced. In 1996, information suddenly surfaced that Prince Carlos Hugo had an illegitimate daughter, Margarita de Bourbon-Parme, born of a liaison with a French model. This woman possessed every legal right to a share of the inheritance of the House of Bourbon-Parme, including claims upon property that, through the marriage of Irene, had been drawn into the orbit of the Dutch royal family. What occurred? Margarita strove to obtain recognition and her share of the inheritance. The Dutch royal court deployed every juridical and media resource to smother the story. The affair was put to sleep, and Margarita herself was discredited in the press as an adventuress. The essential point is this. Through this illegitimate line, financial machinations touching the assets of the House of Bourbon-Parme, a portion of which had settled in the Netherlands, might have been brought to light. The affair of Joost Tavernier, the witness who disappeared. In the 1990s, rumors circulated in the Belgian and Dutch press concerning ties between the royal family and pedophile networks. These rumors formed part of a wider European scandal. Recall the Dutrix affair in Belgium. In the Netherlands, one of the key witnesses who could supposedly cast light upon these ties was a certain Joost Tavernier, a former employee of the security service of the royal palace. Tavernier was dismissed under mysterious circumstances and began to give testimony to journalists. He asserted that he was in possession of information touching parties involving underage participants, attended by high-placed persons connected to the court. In 1996, shortly after he had agreed to cooperate with the investigation, Tavernier was found hanged in his apartment in The Hague. The official account, suicide. All his notes and documents vanished. The case was closed within 48 hours. The strange death of the infant Prince Claus. Queen Beatrix and Prince Claus had 3 sons. Willem Alexander, the present king, Johan Friso, who perished after the avalanche, and a third, little-known son, Prince Claus the Younger, who died in infancy in 1969. The official cause was complications following the delivery. Yet in Dutch alternative circles, a persistent version circulates, to the effect that the child was born with severe genetic abnormalities, unsurprising, given the consanguineous marriages of the House of Orange, and that it was put to death by the family's decision, in order to avert a scandal. No official investigation has ever been conducted. The medical records are sealed. This history serves as a reminder. The House of Orange is prepared to go to any lengths to preserve the facade of the ideal family. The puppet masters. Who truly governs the House of Orange? In the Netherlands, the situation is still more closed than in Britain. The key role here is played, not so much by banking capital, as with the Rothschilds in Britain, as by the military-industrial complex and the secret services. Prince Bernhard, the father of Beatrix, was no mere corrupt playboy. He was one of the founders of the Bilderberg Club and had direct ties to the CIA and to Dutch intelligence. His Lockheed scandal was but the tip of the iceberg. He oversaw far darker operations, including the supply of arms to conflict zones through shell companies. Willem-Alexander, before his accession to the throne, was known for his friendship with representatives of Dutch organized crime, and in particular with figures connected to the cocaine trade through the port of Rotterdam. The security service of the royal household, DKDB, is a state within a state. They possess the right to seize any document, to tap telephones, and to physically eliminate threats. It is they who carry out the cleansing of scandals before they reach the press. The conclusion is therefore inescapable. Within the Dutch royal family, there is no less intrigue than in the British. Indeed, there is more. Simply, the British media, even the gutter press, possess some degree of liberty, and the House of Windsor makes use of scandals to manipulate public opinion, the leaking of Harry and Meghan as scapegoats. In the Netherlands, a totalitarian model of control is in operation. Anyone who draws too near to the truth either perishes under mysterious circumstances, Johan Friso, Joost Tavernier, or vanishes forever from the public stage. The House of Orange are no mere Jabot vipers. They are a mafia clan that governs its little kingdom with an iron hand, and their power rests, not upon the love of the people, but upon fear and the total cleansing of information. The Netherlands could be a republic. It was a republic for the greater part of its history, and that was the age of its glory, the golden age of the 17th century, when Dutch merchants and mariners held dominion over world trade, science, and art. Without any king, the monarchy of today is a relic, an anachronism subsisting only because no one has troubled to abolish it. Yet when an economic crisis descends upon the Netherlands, when the taxpayers come to understand how many billions are swallowed by the upkeep of the palaces, the yachts, and the holy socks of the royal family, then they will put the question. And the answer will be, the House of Orange has no right to the throne. It never has. 5.16. The dismantling of the House of Orange. How a citizen of the Netherlands may cast down the House of Orange through the courts. The foregoing chapters have proved the case. The House of Orange has no right to the throne. They are German counts, appointed by foreign powers. They abandoned their people in 1940 and fled, which, by every historical precedent, is tantamount to abdication. For 5 years they governed from London through theoretically invalid decrees, and in 1945 they returned upon the bayonets of the Allies and self-fabricated their own legitimacy through a parliament that they themselves had convoked. They contracted morganatic marriages which, in any sound dynastic system, would have deprived their issue of all rights to the throne. Now a practical question arises. What is to be done with this knowledge? It is not enough merely to have read a book and to be filled with indignation. Knowledge without action is a diversion. Action transforms knowledge into a weapon. This chapter is a practical instruction, no incitement. An instruction. We shall tell the citizen of the Netherlands how he may make use of the judicial system, the very one that the House of Orange controls, to drive them into a trap from which there is no exit without an acknowledgement of their own illegitimacy. Why the courts precisely? There is a temptation to suppose that the matter may be resolved in the streets. Rallies, demonstrations, slogans. Yet the street, in the Netherlands, is a piece of stage scenery. The House of Orange has learned the art of weathering rallies. They sat out the protests of the 1960s. They sat out the wave of discontent after the Lockheed scandal of the 1970s. They sat out the furor over the marriage of Willem-Alexander to the daughter of a functionary of the Argentine junta. The street clamors, the press debates, and then the King's Day arrives, and everything is forgotten until the next scandal. A court of law is a different matter. A court demands an answer, not a rhetorical one, not an emotional one, a juridical one. A judge cannot shrug his shoulders, smile, and wave his hand from a balcony. He must render a decision, either to grant the action or to dismiss it. Either decision leaves a trace. Either decision may be appealed. Either decision may be quoted. A judicial proceeding, even a losing one, converts emotion into a document, and a document endures for decades. A smile from a monarch cannot erase it. In which court to bring suit? A citizen of the Netherlands has several routes before him. Let us examine each in turn. The Civil Court of the Netherlands, Rechtbank Den Haag. This is the most obvious starting point. Why precisely the court at The Hague, and not some district court at Assen or Maastricht? Because The Hague is the seat of the government and the locus of all the key organs of state. It is here that proceedings against the state are heard. The juridical foundation for the lodging of the action is Article 1:2 of the Civil Code of the Netherlands. This provision recognizes as legal persons the state itself, its provinces, its municipalities, and other public bodies. The king, as head of state, represents the kingdom. Consequently, the action is brought against the state of the Netherlands, represented by its head, King Willem-Alexander. What is the substance of the action? It is not a demand that the monarch be overthrown upon the instant. A court will not go so far. The action seeks a declaration of a juridical fact, that the person occupying the office of head of state lacks sufficient legal foundation for so doing. This is no action against the crown as an institution. The crown possesses constitutional immunity, and to attack it directly would be fruitless. It is an action against the state, which recognizes the said person as king without any sufficient legal foundation. The difference is one of principle. What may a court do? It may dismiss the action upon the ground that it cannot intrude upon the constitutional order. Or it may, and this is not beyond the bounds of possibility, admit the action to be heard, if the argumentation is juridically weighty enough. When all is said, judges are jurists, and not sycophants. Let them be presented with facts, and not with slogans. The European Court of Human Rights, ECTHR. Should the Dutch courts decline to hear the substance of the matter, and they will, in all probability, decline, the path to Strasbourg lies open. Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights guarantees to every person the right to a fair trial. Article 13 guarantees the right to an effective remedy. Article 14 forbids discrimination upon any ground, including birth. How may this be applied to the House of Orange? The Dutch system refuses to entertain the question of the legitimacy of the monarch, even when a citizen adduces documented facts. This signifies that the citizen is denied the right to judicial protection upon this question, and this constitutes a violation of Article 6 and Article 13 of the Convention. Moreover, one may invoke Article 3 of Protocol No. 1, which guarantees the right to free elections to the legislature. If the parliament that takes decisions in the name of the people was itself begotten by an illegitimate provisional government in 1945, and we have proved this in the preceding chapters, then the electorate is denied the right to legitimate representation. This is no historical abstraction. It is a continuing constitutional defect. The ECTHR cannot cast down the House of Orange. Yet it may find that the Dutch state is in violation of the rights of its citizens by refusing to entertain questions touching the legitimacy of the head of state. Such a ruling, even one that goes no further than a finding of a violation, would be a juridical bomb. The courts of the former colonies, Indonesia, Suriname, the island territories of the Caribbean, all of them possess legal systems that have inherited elements of Dutch law. In some of these countries, the constitutional restraints may be slighter, and the courts may stand more independent of the crown. In theory, it is possible to find a jurisdiction in which the question of the legitimacy of the House of Orange will not be automatically blocked. For instance, Suriname is an independent republic, whose legal system grew out of the Dutch one, yet whose courts are under no obligation to make a show of reverence before the royal house of the Netherlands. An action brought at Paramaribo would create a precedent that it would be impossible to ignore at The Hague, the International Court of Justice. In theory, this route exists, yet it is closed to private persons. Only a state may initiate proceedings before the International Court of Justice. Should some country, Russia, China, or any other state with an interest in the weakening of European institutions, resolve to institute proceedings, the thing would be possible. Yet a private citizen cannot set such a process in motion, and it would be idle to include this point in a practical instruction. Who may be a plaintiff? A plaintiff in a Dutch court may be any citizen of the Netherlands, or any person whose rights are directly affected by the acts of the crown. Who, in concrete terms? The citizen taxpayer. The most obvious candidate. Every Dutchman surrenders a portion of his income to the budget from which the royal household is financed. If the royal household is illegitimate, these disbursements are made in favor of usurpers. This constitutes a direct financial injury. The court may demand proof that the taxpayer has suffered a personal detriment, yet the mere posing of the question already creates a juridical precedent. A descendant of an historic dynasty. Should there be found, within the Netherlands or beyond its borders, a person who can prove his descent from the House of Stuart, from the House of Orange-Nassau in the direct male line, which became extinct in 1890, or from any other dynasty whose rights were violated by the Congress of Vienna in 1815, such a person would possess an ideal standing to bring the action. He is no abstract citizen. He is an alternative claimant, whose right was wrested from him by political machinations. A Republican organization. Political parties and public bodies that advocate a Republican form of government may also appear as plaintiffs. Their statutory objects coincide directly with the subject matter of the action. Upon what to build the action, the 5 pillars. A great judicial proceeding is erected, not upon rhetoric, but upon documented facts. A judge is not obliged to share your indignation. He is obliged to weigh the proofs. Therefore, the action must rest upon 5 pillars, the very ones we have established in the preceding chapters, yet now formulated in the language of the law. The first pillar, the absence of a lawful title. Willem I became king, not by hereditary right and not by conquest, but by the decision of 5 foreign powers assembled at Vienna in 1815. No dynastic right to the throne existed, nor does it subsist now. Moreover, the House of Orange-Nassau is a comital house, not a royal one. A count cannot become a king by the mere raising of a hand at an international conference. The second pillar, flight as abdication. In May of 1940, Queen Wilhelmina quitted the territory of the Netherlands and fled to England. The historical precedents, the English, James II, 1688, the German, Kaiser Wilhelm II, 1918, the Austrian, Emperor Karl I, 1918, establish beyond ambiguity. A monarch who abandons his people and quits the territory of the state forfeits the throne. The fact of flight is an abdication. No formal instrument is required for this. None was required by the Convention Parliament of 1689 when it declared the throne vacant. The third pillar, the null legitimacy of the government in exile. From 1940 to 1945, a so-called Government of the Netherlands in exile operated in London. Yet Parliament had been dissolved. The States General did not sit. No one had expressed confidence in the government. The Constitution required the assent of Crown and Parliament for any decree. Parliament did not exist. The Dutch historians themselves acknowledge every London decree was theoretically invalid. The fourth pillar, Parliament as the product of a self-creation. In May of 1945, Wilhelmina appointed a provisional government, which, in the autumn of that same year, organized parliamentary elections. Yet Wilhelmina herself was, by that time, no longer the lawful queen. She had abdicated by the very fact of her flight. The provisional government was appointed by an illegitimate person. The elections were organized by an illegitimate government. The parliament elected at those elections cannot be the fountain of legitimacy for anyone whatever, for it is itself the product of an illegitimate chain. This parliament subsequently, and retroactively, ratified the London decrees and confirmed the queen's status. The serpent bit its own tail. The fifth pillar, morganatic marriages. The marriage of the heiress presumptive, Beatrix, to Claus von Amsberg, a German without royal blood. The marriage of the heir, Willem Alexander, to Maxima Zorrigida, the daughter of an Argentine minister. In any strict dynastic system, these unions would have been accounted morganatic, and the issue of them would possess no right to the throne. The fact that Parliament approved these marriages merely confirms the truth. The crown is not transmitted by blood. It is issued by Parliament for temporary use. Why the court will refuse, and why this does not matter. Any jurist practicing in the Netherlands will tell you. The chances of the action being granted are near to zero, and he will be right. Yet he will miss the essential point. The action is not required to be granted at first instance. It is required to be lodged. A Dutch court will, in all likelihood, refuse upon one of 3 grounds. First, the political question. The court will hold that the legitimacy of the head of state is not a matter capable of being resolved by judicial proceedings. It is a question of constitutional law and not of a civil action. Courts do not intrude into political affairs, and they do not depose monarchs. Second, a want of standing. The plaintiff must prove a concrete, personal, measurable injury, that his taxes go toward the upkeep of the royal household. The court may deem this insufficient, since taxes are paid by everyone, and only the plaintiff is aggrieved. The court will demand proof that the plaintiff has suffered in greater measure than any other taxpayer. Third, the expiry of limitation periods. The events of 1815 of May 1940 and of the autumn of 1945 occurred too long ago to be the subject of a present-day judicial inquiry. Yet it is precisely here that the weapon lies concealed. The refusal of the court is not the end. It is the beginning. The bare fact of the lodging of the action creates a public precedent. The Dutch media will be compelled to write of it, if only to hold it up to ridicule. Republican organizations will receive a document that may be cited. Citizens who have never before reflected upon the legitimacy of the House of Orange will, for the first time, encounter the arguments assembled in a juridical form. The court's refusal may be appealed. First, to the Court of Appeal. Then, to the Supreme Court of the Netherlands. Then, to the European Court of Human Rights. Each round of appeal is a new occasion for a news report. Fresh headlines. Fresh opportunities to bring the arguments before the public. And even if the ECTHR refuses, and it will, in all probability, refuse, the arguments of the action will be fixed forever in the public domain. Any journalist, any historian, any politician will be able to cite them. A practical plan of action. For the citizen of the Netherlands, or for a group of citizens who desire to act, the sequence of steps stands thus. Step 1. Find a solicitor. There must be no lodging of an action by a layman on his own behalf. A jurist is required, specializing in constitutional and administrative law. He must understand that the chances of success are minimal, yet be prepared to conduct the proceeding for the sake of the proceeding itself. Such solicitors exist. The Republican organizations of the Netherlands know their names. Step 2. Prepare the statement of claim. It must be couched in the language of the law and not in that of emotion. Facts, documents, precedents. No usurpers and no German interlopers. These are for a book and not for a court. In a court, one requires citations of constitutional articles, of historical precedents, of parliamentary acts, of the findings of historians. The 5 pillars must be translated into juridical arguments. Step 3. Lodge the action in the Rechtbank Den Haag. This is the first redoubt. The court will, in all probability, refuse, yet it must be confronted with the fact. An action in a court is no private letter. It is a public document. Step 4. Appeal the refusal. First to the Court of Appeal, and thereafter to the Hoge Raad, the Supreme Court of the Netherlands. At every stage, press releases, interviews, publications in the media. Every refusal is a piece of news. Step 5. Apply to the ECTHR. Once the domestic remedies have been exhausted, the action is lodged at Strasbourg. This will consume years. And throughout all those years, the question of the legitimacy of the House of Orange will remain in the public square. No single one of these steps guarantees a victory in the sense of the instantaneous overthrow of the monarchy. Yet each step brings nearer the day when Dutch society will no longer be able to affect that the House of Orange are the lawful kings. For it is one thing to read an angry book. It is quite another to observe, as one after another, the highest courts of the land decline to entertain the question of the legitimacy of their own monarch, devising ever more ingenious procedural evasions for the purpose. And that, in truth, is the chief fruit of the proceeding, to demonstrate that the system is afraid to examine its own foundations.